Hey, what's going on guys? Your boy TrollsAlmighty here, and today we're going to be talking about how to fish shaky heads and straight tail worms. We'll be going over everything from color, to length, to line, to gear, and much more. I know that a lot of channels like to waste your time with a 10-minute video, but I'm only going to need a few minutes of your time to go in depth about the technique of fishing shaky heads. In general, there are two types of fish that you're targeting. Hungry feeding bass, those are the ones that hit all the reaction lures, spinnerbaits, topwaters, and even a bird if you're lucky. And then there's dormant, or as I like to call them, lazy bass. The ones in their summer haunts, at the bottom of a lake or under a laydown, trying to conserve as much energy as possible. This is typically the way that I have described largemouth, very lazy, waiting for the food to come to them. Regardless of which you're targeting, however, the goal you're trying to accomplish when fishing the shaky head is providing the fish an easy opportunity for a meal, and that's when you'll get your bites. This is common throughout the animal kingdom. From cheetahs to crocodiles, ambush predators will target the weak and the old. In other words, the easiest opportunity for a meal, and that's what you're trying to do with the worm. Consider the worm a baby gazelle to a cheetah, a non-threatening, slow-moving, weak, and easy opportunity for that cheetah to keep surviving. Bass are very similar in that way, capitalizing on any opportunity that keeps them alive, while expending as little energy as possible. So, how do you produce these bites? Well, that basically comes down to three major questions: how, why, and where. So let's start with the why. Why should you throw the shaky head and or straight tail worms? There are many different reasons, but they basically boil down into two words: versatility and subtlety. Being able to fish a lure anywhere, in any body of water, opens you up to the amount of fish you can catch. And with a subtle presentation, and something as innocent as a worm, can really help you produce more and bigger bites. And that's really helpful when the fish are really finicky. But even when they are finicky, how do those fish pick up on your lure? Bass have a sensory organ called the lateral line. It runs the length of their body and picks up on electromagnetic pulses and vibrations in the water, giving them directional information on prey, and in this case, your lure. And that's why ribbed worms are so important. The small ribs cut out in the plastic on your worms put off a very subtle vibration, especially when going over things such as laydowns. And just that little bit of vibration can really help the bass key in. Bass also use sight to locate their prey. You can tell they're sight predators because of their eye size in proportion to the size of their head. In fact, you can see this throughout the animal kingdom. From birds of prey such as owls to aquatic predators such as squid, large eyes are an asset to predators in order to target food at a distance and to remain targeted on that prey. But when it comes to fishing, it's not just about getting the fish to see your lure, it's about tricking them into eating it. And on some bodies of water, finicky fish can be very picky about what they eat. Sometimes even the presentation of a spinnerbait is too much for them, which is why the innocent presentation of a worm can get those finicky fish to commit. Another way bass target prey is smell. Now, that's not extremely important in our situation, but occasionally in stained conditions, salted worms can help bass key in on your lure. So from time to time, it's worth a try to throw those salted worms. And last but not least is sound. Sound is just another vibration that fish can pick up on, and usually only applies to topwater lures. But in this case, it's the exact opposite of sound. It's silence. Meaning those fish that are easy to spook will be more willing to check out your lure. And finally, where? As I previously mentioned, you can pretty much fish these lures anywhere. It's a weedless setup, making it extremely versatile. This means you can fish laydowns, rock, grass, drop-offs, bluff walls, and much more. But you're going to want to spend a majority of your time fishing cover, especially if you're targeting those lazy bass. It's hard for those bass that are underneath the laydown, saving all their energy to pass up an easy meal like a worm. Now that we've covered the basics of this fishing technique, we can move on to lure selection. Now, there are plenty of worms on the market, different sizes, different colors, but here are some of my favorite. First, we've got the power bait hit worm in the pumpkin seed color. These worms are scented, and the smallest I have on the list. So these are for really clear water, very finicky fish, even smallmouth if you have to downsize. I've even seen trout caught on these things, so this is probably your all-round worm. Next, we have the KVD finesse worm in the bold bluegill color. This is a very thin presentation, but long enough that it targets all size of bass. Next is the zoom trick worm. These are pretty popular, and this is the pumpkin color, a very natural presentation. The Guggenbait Slim Shake is one of my favorites. This is the blue baby color. It has a very unique body, and it's Guggenbait, so you know I had to get it. And we saved the best for last. This is the net bait flex worm. This is the Alabama crawl color. They come in other colors, but this one one is my personal favorite, and it holds my personal best bass. Call me biased, I guess, but these are by far my favorite worms to fish. As you can see, we have a whole range of colors here, so if you're wondering how I choose my colors to fish a certain body of water, it basically comes down to water clarity. The clearer the water, the more natural color you're going to want to go with. You can get away with vibrant colors in clear water. In fact, in some cases it helps them key in on it from a farther distance, but I like to stay really natural in clear water, especially to combat those finicky fish. But when it comes to stained or murky water, you're going to want to follow this general rule. Either get brighter or darker with your colors. You want something they can really key in on. Whether that's a vibrant color or just a dark silhouette, both are worthy ways to combat that murky water. In the case of these lures, when it comes to choosing color, I've laid them out from left to right, from clearest water to murkiest water. Of course, that'll be different on your body of water, so it'll take some time to figure that out. Next, you're going to want to be able to choose a shaky head to fish this worm on. Whichever worm you choose, the Bass Pro Rock and Wobble is a great selection for shaky head. It's 2 per pack, $5 a pack, and come in a bunch of different weights. Personally, I like to stick between 1/4 and 3/4 ounce. It depends on your body of water and where the fish are located. Regardless, this is a really cheap option, and with it being so cheap, it allows you to replace it, which is important because if you're not willing to lose your shaky head, you're really not fishing it properly. So that's why I go with the Bass Pro Rock and Wobble. And although I don't really mind losing my setup, I don't want to lose any fish. So let's go ahead and get into the gear I use to fish these worms, starting with my line. Now, line is a matter of preference, so that really comes down to your personal choice. Each different type of line serves a different purpose, but in my case, I like to use 14 to 20 pound mono. You'll hear a lot of people say they like to use braid when they're finesse fishing, but that's not really my thing. I like to fish these lures on laydowns, getting them deep in the trees, and in most cases on the bottoms underneath the laydowns. Braid is really bad for abrasion, and when you've got a 10 pounder on, you want to make sure you can pull it in. I found that little extra stretch that mono gives you allows you to be able to play the fish in the laydowns after you've gotten them hooked, which, if we're being honest, is the most important part. And to get them out of those laydowns, you'll need a medium heavy rod. You can throw these on spinning rigs, but personally I like to use them on bait casters. They're heavy enough to where you can actually throw them far enough, and it's 10 times easier to use a bait caster, especially when you're flipping. Right now I've got this shaky head set up on a Lew's Mach 2 speed stick, but my favorite rod to use is the Smash Combo, which is also by Lew's. I just feel like it's a little bit more sensitive. Again, this comes down to preference. You can use any rod and reel you want, but I do recommend a medium heavy with a fast action tip. That's really going to be helpful when it comes to hook sets and getting your fish to the boat. The last thing on the list of gear is a net. Now, this isn't a necessity, but I do highly recommend it. When you're doing this type of fishing, you can catch fish of all sizes, and you definitely don't want to lose your PB just because you didn't have a net. So get the net, period. Once you got everything on, you're going to want to make sure you're using the right technique. You fish this setup by keeping your rod tip at a 45-degree angle. Anything lower and you lose sensitivity, and anything higher you're just dragging your lure on the bottom. In some cases that's preferable, but personally I like the way the worms work when you're using it at a 45. You're doing more of a lifting action than a dragging action, which means you're picking it up off the bottom in front of their faces and letting it slowly dance back down, and that's where these lures shine. In fact, in some cases, you'll get your bites while the worms are falling down to the bottom. That's that unique, subtle swimming action that these worms have. Bass just can't resist it. So be sure to remember the 45-degree angle when you get on the water. To finish out this video, I'd like to talk about some do's and don'ts of shaky head and worm fishing. First, do throw this in clear water conditions, especially in water where fish are extremely pressured. The best example I can give of this in my area is South Holston Lake. If you've fished South Holston Lake, then you've heard of the legendary green pumpkin worm. South Holston is overly populated and overfished. That, coupled with clear water conditions, makes the smallmouth very finicky, which is why this is the perfect technique to combat that. Do dead stick your lure from time to time. Sometimes just letting a lure sit right next to a piece of cover is all it takes for a bass to eat. So if you're having a hard time getting bites by hopping it, or even just dragging it on the bottom, dead stick your lure and let it sit there for a couple of seconds. Sometimes something as simple as that can actually trigger the bites. And lastly, do fish this shallow and deep. This goes back to versatility, but you really can work these lures just about anywhere. However, be sure to remember, regardless of where you're working it, shallow or deep, to stay in contact with the bottom. Personally, that's why I like to use a little bit heavier weights on my shaky head. I usually stick between a 1/2 ounce to 3/4 ounce. That way I can really feel the bottom, and it sinks faster. Of course, this depends on where you're fishing and what the fish are doing, but once you've picked up on a pattern, it can help you decide your weights. Don't be afraid to fish big worms. In most cases, I like to stick around 7 inches. I feel that's the best profile for any bass I'm targeting, but even the dinks will hit 10-inch worms, and sometimes bigger, so don't be afraid to upsize your worm. This can be really helpful in the tournament setting when you're trying to target quality over quantity, but trust me, this will get you both. Don't be afraid to change weights, especially if you've never fished a body of water before or you're just having a hard time locating them. Switching weights can put your lure in a different part of the water column, and that can help you pick up on a pattern. Switching weights is also important when wind is present. When it comes to finesse fishing, sensitivity is key. So when the wind blows, tie on a heavier weight, allowing you to fill the bottom easier. And lastly, don't be afraid to throw in thick cover. That is the whole purpose of using this lure. Those lazy fish are going to sit in the best, thickest spots of cover that they can find. And if that's the fish you're targeting, that's where you need to cast. As I mentioned beforehand, the rock and wobbles are pretty cheap, and that's why I don't care to throw them up in the thickest laydowns I can possibly find. And that's how we're gonna wrap this one up. A quick guide to catch more and bigger fish on shaky heads and straight tail worms. If you found this video helpful, then be sure to subscribe. It's free, and it really helps me out. If you guys would like more tutorials like this in the future, then be sure to let me know down in the comments. If you guys have any more questions, then be sure to leave those down in the comments as well, and I'll be sure to get back to you. But like I said, guys, that's all I've got for you today. So if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to hit the like button below, comment, rate, subscribe, do what you guys do, and we'll see you guys in the next one.